to imagine that this pleasant New England town called Windsor was once the site of a very dark history. A history that led neighbor to view neighbor with suspicion, where each obscured corner of unexplored wilderness could be viewed as a refuge for Satan and his minions, where one woman was blamed for acts of nature and another blamed for a tragedy that defied logic. Windsor, Connecticut holds a unique place in history. The very first town in the state of Connecticut was also the very first to accuse a resident of witchcraft in 1647. Her name was Alice Young, and she was the first person to die of witchcraft crimes in the American colonies. 7 years later, Windsor accused its second victim, Lydia Gilbert. It took almost 4 centuries for the town of Windsor to acknowledge these victims and clear their names. This is the story behind what happened and the motivations of the people involved. What was important to you about doing this project to clear the names of Windsor's early witch trial victims?
Well, being a lifelong Windsor resident, we all grew up knowing who Alice Young was. And then a woman in town wrote a book called The One of Windsor. And that woman happens to be here today with us, sitting next to me. But that book started people really talking about it again. And it really created kind of a positive buzz around town about this whole situation. And I remember having coffee with you talking about thinking, gee, you know, after all these years, wouldn't it be nice to do something for her? And of course, you know what the process was like. But the most striking thing was hearing from her descendant. And of course, I fast forwarded through a lot of our meetings, but that was the one that really personalized this. And a conversation actually with you where you had pointed out quite correctly that this was a human. This was a Windsor resident. These were 2 young ladies that lives were taken way too early because of the hysteria of the time. And that really is the most poignant part for me that emphasized that we really need to do this for her. And for them, I'm sorry, Lydia as well.
Tell us, what role would the First Church of Windsor have played in the witchcraft hangings or the accusations of Alice Young and Lydia Gilbert in the 1600s?
Well, I would suspect that they probably had a fairly significant role. So the First Church in Windsor is the oldest church in New England, and we believe it to also be the 4th oldest congregational church in the world. Mm-hmm. And the members that came over from Europe in 1630, they were Puritans, and they were seeking religious freedom at that time, and were certainly a product of their time. And so Puritans were, they believed in individual and corporate compatibility and conformity to the teachings of the Bible at that time, which was a fairly rigid interpretation. Mm-hmm. And they were also seeking moral purity, not just individually, but also within the community. And so this was to a very high degree, and that they sought this purity. And they believed that man existed to serve God, and that was their, I guess, goal towards heaven, you might say, was to serve God and be righteous and pure in that practice. At the same time, they believed very much in the active existence of the devil. The devil was just as real, the spirit of the devil was just as real as the spirit of God. And so they were very fearful of the temptations and the existence of sin in their everyday lives. And so I think that this is certainly from where the first pastor of First Church preached from. This was his faith, his theology, and Reverend John Warham was the name of the first pastor. And the fear of the devil was very real indeed, and those who deviated from conformity to this Christian ideal were a problem, I guess you might say. So I thought it would be a great idea if I read some information that we share on our website about Reverend John Warham, and to kind of give you a feel for what information we do have relative to his understanding of witchcraft. So first, so what I wanted to share is first that the Windsor colony was probably fairly successful in no small part because of his prominence in the community. Reverend John Warham was a very formidable pastor and man in the community, and Cotton Mather even referred to him as the principal pillar and father of the colony. So with that, it's shared on our website through some other sources that Reverend John Warham minced no words when it came to battling the scourge of witchcraft in the Windsor community. It seems one Lydia Gilbert, who was known to often violate her Christian obligation of charitable and peaceable behavior, was suddenly accused in 1654 of a militiaman's death, which had occurred 3 years earlier. Clearly, it had been her dark powers which caused a musket to accidentally fire and mortally wound him. The court decided that it was indeed the devil's work and ordered her hanged. The following Sunday, Pastor Warham arose to warn of a chastising God and exhorted his parishioners, "You have strayed from the paths of virtue, tippling in alehouses, night walking, and worst of all, engaging one another in repeated strife."
What really gets me is the night walking.
Right.
You had better close your doors after dark, after the sun sets.
So the congregation was definitely swayed by the religious rigidity of its time and was active in the growing social hysteria to scourge witchcraft from the community, and that certainly prevailed, at that time. So
Sure.
I would say, that they probably had a pretty prominent role, although because of the way these records were not kept, it really is hard to say for sure.
What led you to be so determined to clear the names of these victims?
It started in October of 2005. Myself and several other interested people attended a lecture given by the state historian, Walter Woodward, up in Torrington, Connecticut. Mm-hmm. And his topic was, of course, the Connecticut witchcraft trials. And he gave a very good presentation. And afterwards, several people approached him and asked him if anybody in the state had ever made any kind of an effort to clear the names of the 11 victims. And he said no, to his knowledge, no one had, but it sounded like an interesting thought. And from that point, there was kind of an impromptu group that formed together to start this quest. And we thought it was one of the first things that we had considered was the word pardon. I found out that the governor in the state of Connecticut does not have the authority to issue pardons. That falls to the Board of Pardons and Paroles, which is not the case in Massachusetts. The governor can pardon people or indicate resolutions and so forth. So we wrote to the Board of Pardons and Paroles, and a couple of days later I got a return letter, a short letter, and the gentleman thanked me and thought I did interesting research. However, the Board of Pardons and Paroles indicated that they do not pardon dead people.
So where did you go from there then?
Well, at the time we had two of the individuals were a mother and daughter who were descendants, and they were able to get some really good press on the subject. And Connecticut at that time was under the rule of the English kings. It might be a good idea to write to England.
No kidding. So you wrote to the Queen of England.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes, and it was
That's
really
amazing.
interesting, and I got a quick response from them. And their staff basically indicated that in order for the Queen to take any action on this, each case would have to be reopened and determine a guilt.
I see.
And unfortunately, in Connecticut, the records are almost non-existent. So opening cases was not the way to go. And they also indicated that because at the time Connecticut was a colony, the colony of Connecticut, it might be better to talk to the governor.
I see.
So that was another direction that we went in.
Okay. Was there anything that happened in the legislature?
The two descendants, a mother and daughter, and another descendant, so there was three descendants, presented a proclamation before the General Assembly here in Connecticut. And when you testify at the General Assembly, you have 3 minutes to speak. And each of the descendants spoke, and the General Assembly was so interested in their presentation that they asked several questions. And the actual testimony lasted 45 minutes. Unfortunately, at the end of this, they ran out of time and it was not voted on, so it didn't pass.
So what specifically were they voting on? It was a resolution to acknowledge the victims or to clear their names? What was it specifically?
It was basically a proclamation to clear the names of all 11 who had been hanged in Connecticut.
Now, does the governor, does he have the power to do a proclamation?
So I started writing to the governor, and unfortunately, I never got a response on it.
You never got a response. Okay. If you don't mind telling our audience how you hooked up with me and the mayor, how you found out about Windsor and thought, well, maybe if we can't do it on the state level, we'll start going town by town.
Well, I think that's an interesting question, and it's an interesting story because one of the papers that I enjoy reading is the Hartford Courant, and I pick it up periodically and I go through it. And this one particular day, I picked up the Hartford Courant and I opened to page 3, and here was your picture, and very big wording. It said, "First Connecticut witch hanged." And I said, oh my God, I thought I was the only one that was really pursuing this any further. And I discovered that you not only were involved in this, but you had written a book. Let me back up a little bit.
Sure.
Connecticut is Connecticut and Massachusetts were actually the only two states in America that ever executed anybody for the crime of witchcraft. Massachusetts had a different situation there because it was determined later on that the court that they used to execute these people for witchcraft was illegal to begin with.
Okay, that's right.
Okay? However, afterwards, there was many efforts that changed things in Massachusetts. Starting in 1711, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts actually awarded reparations for some family members whose family loved one had been executed. Again, that was in 1711. However, by 1957, 15 of those people that had been hanged out of the 20, their names were cleared. Why they left the 5 out is unclear, but however, in 2001, the governor of Massachusetts Commonwealth, Jane Swift, changed that. and they came out and cleared all the names of the 20 people. And that was based, like I said earlier, that they determined many, many years ago that the court was illegal. In addition to that, in 1711, there was what they called in Massachusetts a Bill of Attainder, which was basically when you were found guilty of a capital crime, you lost all your social and rights. So what happened was, in 1711, people that were left from the individuals who had been hanged found that if the person hanged had property, okay, and family members or other concerned people wanted to do something with that property, because that person had been charged with this Bill of Attainder, they had no rights. They had no saying. Basically, in the state of Massachusetts, they did not exist. And that was reversed.
You were one of the key people organizing and planning behind the scenes to bring forth this resolution to the town council that passed in February 2017. And what was it that made you decide to get involved in this?
It was actually your presentation. You gave a talk in a classroom. I was a part of a course at CCSU while I was a master's student, and you spoke about your book and your research, and I was just a student in the class. And there's also the fact that I am Wiccan. And so hearing this story and hearing about it for the first time in a classroom, in history class, and being inspired by the tale, I was hooked. And I knew that I needed to be part of that moving forward. I wanted to read the book and also be part of any social justice that could come out of it.
Social justice is definitely a key phrase in all of this. So as you were presenting this testimony to convince the town council why it was an important issue in social justice to pass this resolution, what was going through your mind? What was it like to be there in that room?
Well, again, I was just the voice of Tony that day. I was happy to put his words in front of the town council. And I was nervous, of course. This is a really big step, and it was a big community movement. But at the same time, I wasn't nervous that it was going to fail. I had faith in the community and the effort and the work that you and the group of people that have revolved around this project and Alice Young. I knew that the passion was going to be fulfilled, you know? And so it was a little nerve-wracking, but also just a place of inspiration.
Was there a key moment during either the testimonies or the entire hearing that really stuck with you, or moments, maybe not just one, that you will remember forever?
Oh, well, I remember thinking that the slogan of Windsor is that it's first for its citizens. And so I was thinking that to myself, you know, it's first for its citizens, you know, present and past. But the biggest moment, I think, was the unanimous vote. And just the sigh of relief I think the three of us had, and the shock and the happiness. It was just such a quick and fast vote. It was overwhelming a little bit.
Item 12 is new business. We do have some of that. Item 12A is a resolution concerning our Colonial Windsor residents. And for this motion, I will pass the imaginary gavel over to the Deputy Mayor for purposes of me making a motion. And that would be that I move to approve the attached resolution relative to the convictions of Alice Young and Lydia Gilbert in Colonial Windsor.
Thank you, Your Honor. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilor Gavoni.
Can I have the gavel back?
No, because did you want to speak on your motion?
Well, I have people who are much more intelligent and much more articulate than I here this evening to bail me out of this. I would like, well, first let me, I'll just say, this started a year ago, maybe even longer, discussions about this. Everybody, well, not everybody, but most Windsor residents knew who Alice Young was, and she was convicted in the 1640s and hung for being a witch. The lesser known is a young lady at the time named Lydia Gilbert, who unfortunately met the same fate in 1654. And as a result of one of our guests this evening who wrote a book about it, conversations have started, and thought that perhaps it was time that as a town we recognized that these young ladies were not really guilty of witchcraft, but rather of hysteria and craze of the time. So with that, while I have the floor, may I introduce, we have three folks here that are going to help me speak to this motion. Shar Corbett, the associate pastor at First Church, Brianna Dunlap, a local historian who wrote Connecticut Valley Tobacco, and our local author, Beth Caruso, who started this all with her book, One of Windsor. Ladies, would you come on up? We'll get you another chair and everything. What a buddy of yours. Good evening. Do you have
Good
a petition?
evening. Nice to see you, Mayor, and all of the town council members. I'd like to present you with petitions. There are 33 pages of petitions to pass this resolution in some form. They are mostly from Windsor residents, but also from other people in other parts of the state who are moved by this issue. So as the mayor said, my name is Beth Caruso. I'm a Windsor resident. I'm here today to support the resolution as an author and a history scholar. The Matthew Grant Diary was an important document from Windsor's earliest history and tells us that in 1647, 27 people died. It was a steep increase from the 6 people that died the previous year. Many children were part of the death toll, including those of the town minister, doctor, and magistrates. Some who died even lived next door to Alice Young. Their deaths coincided with a flu epidemic that swept through New England that same year. In reality, there were 28 Windsor residents that died in 1647. The last death noted was in the Grant Diary and located on the inside cover, and simply stated, Alice Young was hanged, May 26, 1647. Even in death records, she was separated from her neighbors and residents of the town. Pertaining to the history of Windsor's second witchcraft case, Thomas Allen mishandled his gun and accidentally killed Henry Stiles during a militia exercise in 1651. The historical record notes he was found guilty of this crime and sentenced accordingly. After 3 years of speculation and scapegoating, the blame for Henry's death shifted from Thomas Allen to Lydia Gilbert. The Allen family was refunded all fines. Thomas's name was cleared, but Lydia Gilbert died for witchcraft in the hangman's noose. Both Alice and Lydia would have become outcasts in the town of Windsor as a result of their witchcraft accusations. They were separated from their community and were viewed with contempt and fear, ultimately losing their lives by hanging. It has taken 370 years in the case of Alice Young, and 363 years in the case of Lydia Gilbert to bring a resolution before the town council on their behalf. I respectfully ask that you pass this resolution so that the histories of these women can be officially acknowledged in the town of Windsor and that their names be cleared. By seeing their cases from a modern perspective, we know it is unlikely that they were witches. These accusations must have caused unimaginable anguish, as well as their deaths led to a genuine loss for their families. It is never too late to acknowledge history and the subsequent suffering within that history so that we may learn from it. I hope it will give peace to the thousands of descendants who call Alice or Lydia their great-grandmother. It also puts Windsor on the right side of history, on the side of justice, and in a more reputable light, as the accounts of these women will only become better known with time through storytelling, academic research, and the media. Thank you very much for your time and consideration of this extremely historic resolution.
Thank you.
My name is Brianna Dunlap, and tonight I'm speaking on behalf of Anthony A. Grigio, who has worked for almost a decade on clearing the names of the 11 people who lost their lives to witchcraft accusations in Connecticut, including Alice Young and Lydia Gilbert. As Beth has said and introduced, on March 29th, 1630, 11 ships carrying 700 people disembarked from England under the guidance of John Winthrop the Older. Among these elected saints and common sinners were people who only wished to practice a pure form of their beliefs and to escape from harsh religious prosecution. Alice Young and Lydia Gilbert most likely held the belief that once in the New World, they could further their faith under the leadership of their ministers. It was their vision to be part of a better life for themselves and their children. There are no known existing court documents that describe who or how Alice Young was first accused of being a witch. Matthew Grant's diary does tell us that on May 26, 1647, a woman from Windsor known as Alice Young was hanged. What we know today that on that date, Alice's vision of a better life ended. Lydia Gilbert most likely held the same beliefs of a better world as did many others of those times. And Lydia's case tells us more about the thinking of the early Puritans. During an accident that took the life of another Windsor resident, she was held accountable 3 years later and was found guilty of causing the death by witchcraft. And Lydia Gilbert's vision for a better life most likely ended in Hartford. Today, we cannot rewrite history to reverse the sentence that these two Windsor women suffered. But we can recognize that their lives mattered. And today, we cannot be critical of the judgments rendered during those early times. Justice was swift then, and the punishment was unforgivable. No one came forward to defend those accused witchcraft victims for fear they would be suspect of the same crime. But with the passage of this resolution, we hope that Alice and Lydia will once again be embraced by their town and hope that people will remember and reflect on religious freedom and tolerance. So now is the time for Windsor to make new history. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for your time this evening. My name is Reverend Charlene Corbett. I am a resident, the associate pastor at First Church in Windsor at 107 Palisado Avenue. On January 17th, 2017, our church cabinet, the governing board of the church, reviewed the resolution that is before you tonight and voted favorably to support the resolution in its current form. And I have here a copy of the letter from the chair of our cabinet, Alan Relier, urging you to adopt this resolution. This affirmative church cabinet vote came after a recommendation that had been made by our outreach committee, which had spent a reasonable amount of time reviewing the resolution, considering our church's history as it relates to the hangings of Lydia Gilbert and Alice Young, and recommending unanimously that our church cabinet acknowledge these events and the role that First Church played in the indictment and hanging of these two women. First Church in Windsor is sorry for whatever part the congregation played in these two hanging events. We acknowledge that 370 years ago, the First Church in Windsor was in a very different place theologically. Today, we believe the actions taken against these two women in 1647 and 1654 respectively were swayed by the religious rigidity of its time and the growing social hysteria to scourge witchcraft that prevailed in the community. It is documented that witchcraft in the 17th century was a way to conveniently blame people for community afflictions during times of stress and anxiety, and to affix the workings of the devil to individuals who were not meeting their Christian obligations of charitable and peaceful behavior. Today, we believe that those narrow and condemning theological stances in regard to witchcraft were simply wrong. These two young women were brutally murdered unjustly. Today, the members of First Church in Windsor, United Church of Christ, support this resolution as a first step in acknowledging this part of our collective and mutual history, to apologize for its participation in the hanging of these two women, to stand firm in our regard for human life, and to declare our commitment to acts of social justice. We are not out to change history, but rather to learn by it. In our Christian practice of confession, we intentionally set aside time to recognize when our actions or non-actions have been sinful. We acknowledge that we have made mistakes, and we apologize. We take the necessary steps to do better. This is one of those times when we admit that as a community of faithful people, we made an egregious mistake 370 years ago that resulted in the deaths of two women and the mistreatment of their families and descendants. We are sorry for the death and harm that was caused and that continues to be felt. Today, we want to do better. We want to do what is right. And therefore, First Church in Windsor wants to do our part to reclaim the good names of these women. Passing this resolution is the right thing to do. It is a good place to start. There is never a wrong time to do what is right, to do what is just, and to do what is healing. In this very building, the Windsor Town Hall, there is the judicial room named for Alice Young. I have no idea how it came to be that our town's judicial space came to be named after this woman, but I do believe that in part it was a nod to Windsor's history and the injustice that Alice Young experienced. It is time, as a community, that we do more. Members of the Town Council, I urge you, as pastor of First Church in Windsor, to pass this resolution. On behalf of the congregation of First Church in Windsor, United Church of Christ, I thank you sincerely for your time and consideration. And I have a copy of the letter.
Thank you. Sorry, you have the gavel.
Oh.
So I obviously can't do any better than these three ladies in explaining why we're here and why this has come. Our hope is that the other towns that had similar events in their history will do the same as we do, further bringing it with our hope to the state of Connecticut. The state of Connecticut can acknowledge it. It did. There was a motion in the legislature years ago, but shock of all shocks, it never made it out of committee. So we're hoping that we can kind of start the ball rolling, acknowledging we are the first town and acknowledging that we will be the first town to do this. So I want to thank you all for bringing this to my attention and all the work that you've put into it and coming out here this evening. At this point, I will defer back to the mayor, temporary.
Is there any discussion from the council on this matter? Councilor Simon.
First, wanted to make a request. The only people who know what the text of this resolution is are the people who are sitting at the tables. I think it'd be great if we could read it out loud for people.
Do you want to read it?
Agree. All right.
Would you like to read it?
Do you want to read it?
I
You
can
got
read
in
it.
front of you.
Sure. Resolution concerning certain witchcraft convictions of Windsor residents in colonial Connecticut. Whereas in colonial Windsor, 2 persons were accused by their neighbors and townsfolk of practicing witchcraft. And whereas such accusations were made for a variety of reasons, not all reasons being known. And whereas such accusations were sometimes made because a person was associated with the sudden and unexplained illness of another person or persons, or predicted the illness or recovery from illness of another person or persons. And whereas some of the accused persons were blamed for crimes others were already convicted for, or scapegoated for a variety of other reasons when things went wrong. And whereas 2 persons, Alice Young and Lydia Gilbert, were indicted and put on trial for practicing witchcraft. And whereas these trials were conducted without the evidentiary procedures and safeguards that are standard in Connecticut's criminal justice system today. And whereas the accused persons were found guilty of practicing witchcraft and sentenced to death by hanging. And whereas both Alice Young and Lydia Gilbert, residents of Windsor, lost their lives during the colonial witch hysteria, will have their good names restored in the town of Windsor so that they may rest in peace. Now, therefore, be it resolved that although the facts of the accusations, prosecutions, trials, and executions of persons for practicing witchcraft in colonial Windsor, Connecticut cannot be undone or changed, the Windsor Town Council declares its belief that such indictments, even if lawful under the then existing law in the colony of Connecticut, were shocking and the result of community-wide hysteria and fear. And be it further resolved that the adoption of this resolution does not bestow on the town of Windsor, any political subdivision of the town, or any person any right that did not exist prior to its adoption, or authorize any suit or other proceeding, or deprive any party to a suit or other proceeding of any defense that such party previously had, or affect in any way the title to or rights in any real or personal property, or require or permit the remission of any penalty, fine, or forfeiture previously imposed or incurred.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other comments or questions from the council? Councilor Simon.
I do want to speak now. Thank you. I want to actually read aloud an email that was sent to the entire town council through the mayor from a descendant of Miss Young. Alice Young, accused of witchcraft and put to death by hanging on May 26, 1647, is my 10th generation grandmother. Upon discovering this, a deep sense of sadness came over me. Imagining the circumstances around her death and the death of so many others, I wondered how such atrocities could occur. Looking back to the hysteria that was caused within communities, I feel that now more than ever it is important to recognize the injustices that fear-based thinking can lead to. In that time, power was being stripped from women, making way for a patriarchal society to prevail. Religion was used as a tool to provoke fear rather than to uplift. As disease swept through the colonies, people felt the need to place blame on something or someone. They placed blame on anyone who seemed different or on those they felt threatened by. It is my wish that Alice Young, as well as all others in Connecticut accused of witchcraft and tragically put to death, be declared innocent. Furthermore, I ask that a memorial be created out of respect for the lives lost, to remind others of a dark past, in hopes that history will never repeat itself. I was very moved by this statement for all sorts of reasons, because we're dealing in symbolism again tonight. Just like a few weeks ago, we were dealing with symbolism around the John Mason statue, who, of course, led a massacre of 700 Pequot Indians only 10 years before Miss Young was hanged. And like like this grandchild of Alice Young, it seems appropriate to be dealing with this now because there are similar sorts of currents within our society that if left unchecked, could lead to similar results. I would love for a memorial to be created for the people who lost their lives in this hysteria. I think that would be a tremendous counterpoint to a statue of John Mason on the Palisado Green. And I'm hoping others might think well of that idea and maybe have some discussion going forward about that. In the meantime, of course, I'll support this. So.
Anyone else?
I feel like I should say something.
Okay, Councilor Jenkins.
I often say that, you know, I believe that Windsor is such a special place, and we can serve as a beacon of light for the rest of the state. In order to do that, though, it requires that each of us dig deep and put our best foot forward always. Always look to ourselves to do the right thing and encourage other people to do the same. We cannot be swept up in judgment of other people just because they may be different than us or they may believe something different than us. That is not what we are about here in Windsor. I will do everything in my power to promote unity and justice and love. And when people are different from us, I think we need to look at them and learn more about them and accept them and maybe learn from them too. So I will definitely support this. And thank you for bringing it to us.
Any other comments? Councilor Gavoni?
I really want to thank you tremendously for the education I received about the witches. Being a lifelong resident of Windsor, I've always heard about the witch trials. I guess I thought just women on brooms, I think. I'm not too sure. I never thought about it, but I really didn't realize how much they were mistreated and what was going on at the time. So I really appreciate the education that you provided for us, and the folks that are in here and the folks that are watching on TV. It was fantastic. Thank you very much for the time you put into it. Thank you.
Other comments? Councilor McKinney?
Thank you for your presentation. I recently attended an event at the Windsor Historical Society where Karen Parsons out of Loomis Chaffee did a presentation on Nancy Toney, who was the last slave who died in Windsor. And I support this. And I made a note of a couple of things that you said where it's never too late to be on the right side of history. And so I support this, and I just want to make sure, and maybe this leads the way in us recognizing in Windsor and in Connecticut that over many years ago, the Native Americans that were held as slaves and the Africans that were held as slaves. So maybe this leads us in, this is African American History Month, and we seem to celebrate, we dance, we sing, but we really don't do anything. So maybe this, because of your comments, this leads us to address other issues from the past that have never been addressed officially. So I hope this is the lead for that, and thank you for your presentation.
We'll close discussion. We have a motion made by the mayor and seconded by Councilor Gavoni to approve the resolution relative to the convictions of Alice Young and Lydia Gilbert in Colonial Windsor. So we'll take a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Motion passes 9-0. Thank you.
Awesome job, guys.
Well, I think if the opportunity arises that we're able to convince the other towns to clear the names of their individuals, hopefully at some point we can put up some kind of a memorial listing all 11 names.
How do you see this resolution in relation to other towns that had witch hanging victims in Connecticut, or in relation to the state possibly at least acknowledging these 11 witch hanging victims? And there were actually 34 accusations altogether.
Wow.
A lot of suffering.
Well, I see this, and as you've used the term opening the door, and Tony, who, you know, years as an investigator and just a hit the ground running guy, I can see him checking them all off, those other towns one at a time. And with our resolution, and they're welcome to use it, word for word, change the names and a couple dates. Sure. Every other town is welcome to use our resolution. And I really see it now that we've done it, especially with a 9-0 vote.
Right.
I think that will hold so much power and empower them to have the confidence to say, yes, we're going to do just what Windsor did. And then ultimately, hopefully, we can get it into the capital if we say, hey, you know, there's 5 towns in Connecticut, all of which that participated in this behavior, that have done these resolutions. It's time now for the state of Connecticut as a whole to do the same.
That would be wonderful. It's been 370 years since the witch hanging of Alice Young. Only a little bit less, 363 for Lydia Gilbert. It would be fantastic if that could happen one day. So Windsor, anyway, at least Windsor did it, and it's an incredibly historic decision. Did it dawn on you or any of the council members in the moment that what you were passing was so historic?
Well, for me personally, I guess I was kind of wrapped up in the whole mechanics of having the process go through and to really see the effect of it. But very shortly after it passed, I got a text message from someone. And then I got a second one from my wife saying, wow, you guys realize what you did. Mm. And then I was able to kind of, okay, wow, this is, you know what, this has been 370 years in the making, and, yes. And tonight we did this collectively as a group and as a community. And I think everybody in town should be not just proud of us, because we were just the messengers of this, but themselves for looking at this and saying, yeah, you know what they did was right because what we did was wrong 370 years ago. And to see the kind of, bring the town together for this cause. And I think as we move forward, and as Tony, and I hate to keep giving it to him because he's worked so hard, but I think as these other towns fall into place, I think they'll realize, you know, we have the ability to do the same thing, and that their victims can rest in peace as well.
Very good. Could you comment about the diversity and the attitude of Windsor now?
No, I think the diversity is what makes us so successful as a town, and diversity in all respects of the term. And we're a very inclusive town, we're a welcoming town, and the one thing I always like to say is that we tend to keep ourselves out of all of the chaos happening nationally. You know, we're Windsor, we're proud of who we are, we're proud of being the first town, and we're proud of the decisions that we make, which is to include everybody and everything.
And your testimony and Char's passion it was a perfect storm, I think.
It was like no other town council meeting that has ever happened, is what I have been told by the mayor.
That's incredible.
It's pretty amazing.
So going into it, I have to say I did not sense that. I was just set on doing the right thing. And so, you know, in all the time that we met and discussed and considered and pondered the resolution, I didn't stop for 1 minute to think about how historical the moment was going to be. And then we sat down at that table to make the presentation to the town council, and And as I listened to you speak and to Brianna speak, I started to say, wow, I think this is bigger than us. And then as I gave my statement on behalf of First Church, it really did start to feel like it was larger than what was in the room. And I think it wasn't until several of the town council members spoke to the possibility that this might even be a step towards other types of reparation and apologies to be set for other wrongs that have occurred in our community, a community that all of us love, but we know there's dark history everywhere we go, right? And so,
of course,
that this might, yeah, we're human. And so, you know, for this to be a stepping stone to right other wrongs, that's when it hit me. I realized this is not only powerful, but this is historical, and what a beautiful thing.